boat is 34 years old. I'm sure that a lot of the fuel lines are original to the boat. Maybe they've been replaced. I'm not exactly sure. I've had the boat for 8 years, somewhere in that area, and I've never replaced fuel lines. So I have dual tanks, one on each side, and there is a fuel tank selector knob that kind of ties everything in to pull gas from one side or the other, and you got to flip it over. So I'm going to go through and figure out how much fuel line that I need, replace what needs to be replaced, taking apart some of these parts and pieces, and hopefully it helps you guys out. So stay with me. I have this fuel selector that I need to disassemble and take that out. So each line from the tank runs to the selector, and then the one selector runs out to here and then this goes to the outboard. So what I had to do is I took 4 screws off of that little plate, and there is a small Phillips head screw that goes in the top of this selector. Now you need to pull that off. Mine's been on there for a very, very long time. What I did is I took a pair of pliers here, just gently grabbed the I guess the shaft of the valve, and used my screwdriver and just kind of kept prying up a little bit. That is brass. That feels like a potted metal. So, and I loosened it up enough to where this actually just comes off. Now I do need to remember where this actually goes when it goes back on, so I don't mess things up in the when I go and put it all back together. So this top piece comes off. This piece should slide out, slide over that, and then that will expose the 2 screws to get that valve off, so I can get back behind there from here and take the fuel lines off so I can get that stuff replaced. Okay, so the next step was to, once I removed that plate, is this valve is held in with these 2 stainless steel screws. They had lock nuts on the back of them, and there were washers on them. I didn't see them, and they fell back down in there, but I will put washers on them when I go to reassemble it. So now the valve will actually come out, and I'm going to work around through this side and see if I can't get to my fuel lines. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect these fuel lines, and of course you're going to leak some fuel, so because fuel will probably leak out back through the carbs. I don't have anything to stop it. I'm going to keep the primer bulb intact, so fuel will not come back through here, but I'm eventually going to replace all of this line too. I don't know if you can kind of see that, but there from my air box, some of my line there has gotten a little chafed, and I don't know if you can see that right there. So again, it's about time to fix and replace all this stuff before it becomes a big problem. So again, I'm going to cut this away. That way I can remove that fitting. It'll give me a little bit more room back in here where I can actually get my hand and disassemble all the hose clamps and from the valve. And this line actually has that gray liner on the inside of it. And looking down in there, it doesn't look that bad, like it's delaminating. I can see some distortion from when it was on the bar, but I really can't see much further back down into there, so it doesn't look that bad. So I'm going to go to the marina and see if I can't get some line, new bulb, and the appropriate line size to redo all this stuff. All right, next thing I'm going to do is disconnect these fuel lines here going into the pump or the tanks. So these lines are so old that I actually had to cut them off the barb, and so there is some fuel left up in here, so I got a little rag there. I'm going to pull it off, and I'm sure I'm going to leak some fuel back down through there, but not really much you can do about it. It's got to go somewhere, and I don't know how to siphon it out from there. It should be okay. So I'm going to leave that one there, take off that hose clamp, and this line doesn't look that bad, but again, I'm here, I'm going to replace it. So I'm going to get this side done. I had to cut that one as well. I don't know where the pressure is coming from, but those barbs are pretty long. Those barbs are probably about a good 1.5 inches. 1.5 inch long. So got those disconnected, and I'm going to pull them back up through that little access compartment I got sitting over there on the other side. One. Back up through there. There's my valve. Probably gonna leak some fuel, which I did. So I'm going to let it drain out over here into that rag a little bit. Maybe that's not a good idea to put in the rag. But, so I got those two, and I got access to my valve. So let's see here. What else is holding it in there? There we go. So now I can see how all this kind of works. It's a lot easier getting to these fittings now than before. And I still have to get back underneath to get to this fitting over here. And it's just a through hole fitting. It's not a big deal, but it's hose clamp underneath back behind there. So get that stuff figured out, figure out my lines, and keep moving. Okay, so now I'm going to mark. See, I marked it before I took this valve off because I know which way that it's going to sit. So this goes out to my right tank, and then this is my left tank, and then this goes to the outboard. Right. I'm actually going to cut all these away. Just take a utility knife, split them, because obviously I'm not going to reuse them. And then they should come off much easier trying to fight with pulling them back over the barbs. There's that. This one. That one, and this little booger. Just cut it, and it should just pop off there. Again, I think these are the original. Oh yeah. Hopefully this fixes some of my other problem as well. So that stuff is just old and brittle. So I got that. I know where that sits. I don't know if you can see that or not. See how old and dry, cracked, and split that is? That ain't good. That stuff is so dry on the inside. All right. So now the only thing I have left to do is get this one out from underneath that barb. Okay, so another thing that I'm going to note here is that when you're working with this valve to make sure that your fuel selector works correctly the way that it used to, make sure that you line everything up. When on my selector, when it said left, what it was referring to is standing at the back of the boat. The left is the left and the right is the right. Like I said, standing at the back of the boat. So keep that in mind when you're doing this as well. That way you can keep all your lines in correct order and make sure that they go back to the coordinating tanks. The next thing to do is try to get this hose off so it'll pop through fitting here. And again, there's a nut on the back of this fitting, so you don't want to lose it, because I already just dropped my screwdriver. There's that. And I wish I could just pull this through, but because of the nut on the back of the fitting, this is probably the most difficult part. Big hands, and let's see here. I can take, and I can't get anything on the back of that, so I'm just going to have to wiggle it from back behind, and hopefully my hand don't get stuck. I think we're getting it. I hope we're getting it. Thread that back up there. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I'd say that one was original too. And then, so what I did is I threaded that nut back underneath so I wouldn't lose it down in there. So that's the only thing that holds that on. And I do believe that it was on there the wrong way. But, so that's all that holds that in there. So, moving on. Okay, so now that I've got some of this old line, I'm going to cut it and see how bad that it actually is. So in this, I don't know if you could see that. So all that line has basically split and deteriorated in there. I don't know if you can see that. See all that. So that's what we're fixing. At least that's what I hope that fixes the issue. A lot of that stuff is really dry, dry and cracked, and I bet you that stuff is probably 34, 35 years old. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect this main fuel line that goes to the oiling system, and going to get a new primer bulb while we're at it, just because we're here and, well, you might as well. First thing to do is de-snip all the zip ties that were on here that hold the fuel line in place. This is actually pretty simple. Just take a screwdriver and loosen up this hose clamp. Ooh, there's some fuel coming out there. Let's grab a rag. Again, you're going to leak some fuel. It's inevitable. How much you leak is kind of up to you. So it helps to have a little rag handy there. I don't want to open this up all the way, but I just want to open up to the point where I can slide that one back. I have that little check valve will hold the oil back because I didn't think that far in advance. So we got some fuel draining out there. And again, I'm looking at this fuel line, and it has the gray liner, and it actually doesn't look that bad. But again, because I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and replace all this stuff. That way I don't have to come back to it in 4 or 5 years again. And now you can see a better picture of that little nick that I had in the fuel line, and that came from riding right there on the edge of the breather cap. So all this is done, disassembled. Now it's time to get some new fuel line put on it. So here's another little piece of advice. Tape measure down, make sure that you buy enough fuel line. 4 feet, I'm going to guess 3, 7, that one's 18. So 8.5 feet of this line, and gonna have to get a new primer bulb. And that's 3 feet, 16 inches. All right, so got back from the marina, got my new primer bulb, 21 bucks, and got this gray ethanol resistant fuel line. This stuff was $3.50 a square foot, or $3.50 a linear foot. So all in all, it's about 80 bucks for the two. The guy at the marine store told me, he said this stuff is probably good for about 5 to 7 years. So hopefully I still got the boat, and I'll keep that stuff in mind. But now we just got to put it all back together, and hopefully she'll start up for us. Remember, when you do this primer bulb here, it has an arrow on it. And the arrow, this is from the tank, this is going to the engine. So the arrow points in the direction that the fuel flows to the engine. Have this fuel back here in the back, so make sure there are no kinks in it. Make sure it's got enough room to kind of move around a little bit in there. So mine's going to sit back here in the well. So the only other thing that I need to do is from here to there. So I'll cut that. I don't really recommend cutting with the utility knife. A pair of snips would probably work out a lot better. Just one of those little snap clips there. Just make sure you're over the barb. Squeeze it. Get pliers. Okay. So I don't think this will slide over that. It will not. So unfortunately, I'm going to install this barb back over here on this side. I'm going to thread this on. Cinch down a little bit because it was pretty loose when I took it out. So then that will connect to there. I may have to rotate that, so I'm not going to clamp that yet. So now so this line is off my left tank. I still have it marked. I'm going to get a hose clamp. Yes. Figure out how I'm going to. And again, you want to know. One. It's there. I have a little bit more room. So that will connect to this bottom piece here. And so how does that go down? So we need a hose clamp on this side. Sure nothing is. I've got a pump out line back here that I'm fighting with. Make sure nothing's kinked and everything still has plenty of room to kind of move around. Okay. Take a screw. Back in. Back on. Get my fuel selector adjuster again. Put that back on. Screw that back in. Cinch it down, not too tight. It still moves. I think we're good. Last thing I got to do is connect that one. So
have. Okay.
Okay,
And that's
so all back together. Got all the fuel lines, got all the hose clamps, all the fittings, all the attachments, everything should be good. I tightened everything, but now the other test is to start it up and make sure there are no fuel leaks. Tighten everything. Okay, so I got it all primed. I'm not gonna lie, that was a pain. Priming all that fuel, you know, up through those lines, back up through there, up into that selector switch down in the prime, and should be good. So should fire right up. Oh, fired right up. I ran the boat on both tanks off the left and the right side for each about 5 minutes, and it seemed to run fine. Like I said, it revved up fine. Everything should be okay. So the next thing to do is take it to the water and lake test it, and I guess we'll see how everything goes from there. Now, one thing that I will note is, like, I primed that primer ball probably a good 60-70 times, and I didn't feel any slush. My old primer bulb, it used to get really hard when there was a lot of pressure in there, and that may change a little bit. I can't tell, you know, one way or the other if it's right or wrong, but I know that the engine never quit. It revved to 2 grand. I won't rev it any higher on the muffs, but so in a nutshell, I guess that's how you replace your fuel lines, especially if they're 34 years old. If you're having some fuel problems, obviously it's not that complicated. It takes a little bit of time, maybe 80 bucks. If you're going to replace the primer bulb as well, you might be able to get this parts cheaper, but the marina was right down the road. They had everything that I needed. We'll see you the next time.